How does everyone feel about getting started? Since we're running late, I want to preserve as much time as we can. I know we have some people that'll be filtering in. So my name is Brandon Bell. I'm the lead regional planner for the Bear River Association of Governments. I'm also an accredited member of the Congress for the New Urbanism. What that means to you is that I know about walkable communities and how to design them and plan them. And what I've been doing over the last a number of years is essentially identifying ownership structures that are more compatible with walkable communities than the sort of simple ownership that we have of detached structures, single family homes. And this presentation is one of the results of that. So, Steve Waldrop in his presentation talked a lot about the American dream and how people feel like that's at risk. And I've given this presentation before, and what the result I've gotten before is that it hopefully restores hope to a lot of people. We've sort of married the American dream to a particular type of structure, detached single-family home, and I think that's actually kind of a mistake, and it creates a lot of inflexibility and a barrier to property ownership. And so we're going to talk about how to restore that American dream. Uh, and hopefully in doing so, we will arrive at a new level of thinking than what we've used in the past. That I think actually that paradigm that we've used is creating some friction, some problems, and some pain that we're experiencing today. And hopefully we can find that new level of thinking together. And what I'm going to present to you, I think, I love this quote that the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. I believe that for a plan or a dream or a goal to be truly motivated, it has to be beautiful in some way, not just physically beautiful, but beautiful in terms of its principles. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I get so excited about what I'm going to share with you, because I do believe that there's a lot of beauty in this concept, that the concepts that I'm going to share with you. And I also believe in the beauty of home ownership. I believe in property ownership. I think it's essential. I've read multiple accounts of this, but there's sort of this lore that before it was the phrase in the Declaration of Independence was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There are some people who think that it was originally going to be life, liberty, and property ownership. And that phrase is actually in the Virginia Constitution. It was this idea of property ownership was very much tied to a key central theme at the time of around the founding. In particular, I can't remember the source on this, but there's an argument that even though the phrase "pursuit of happiness" was used, it was because they believed that happiness was tied to the ability to control your own property. And if you stop and think about that, that's a really powerful concept, right? So it's something we really want to be able to think about thoroughly and consider. One of the reasons why this is so important is that we have made the decision in this country, for right or wrong, to tie our wealth building opportunities in a lot of ways to property ownership. And as a result of that, in 2022, the median renter was their average net worth was 10,400, but the same family, if they were a homeowner, their net worth was listed as 397,000. And so there's this huge factor of it's this have and have not split situation where once you're in the system of property ownership, it makes a huge difference in your financial standing and opportunities. So one of the problems that we've experienced with this incredible increase in costs of home ownership in the last few years is that we now have a lot of people who have, like Steve referred to, who have done the right thing, so to speak. They've played by the rules, or they worked hard, and they now earn a very good income, but they still can't afford a home. And they also make too much to qualify for some form of assistance, either for rental or other assistance for housing. And so the problem is that basically this orange rectangle means that they're making what has been a decent wage, but they can't use that wage to secure an asset to be able to generate wealth over time and build that generational wealth. So a lot of the information in the next few slides I'm going to give you is going to relate to come from a number of studies. One's from the Harvard Joint Center for Housing, Zillow study in 2017, a Nielsen study Envision Utah study in 2014, Times article, and others. This is sort of background to the core concepts that I'll give you, but for 10 or 15 years, what we heard from experts in housing and lifestyle preferences were that millennials lived in urban areas on the heels of the Great Recession, and they did at a much higher rate than previous generations. However, they gradually migrated towards suburban areas. Now, in addition to that, they also they didn't just live there. They when surveyed said that they would anticipated living there for many years to come in these urban areas. But what happened over time is that again they moved to suburban areas, and these but they didn't do so just carte blanche or indiscriminately. They found that three things were really important. They moved to the suburbs for the sake of affordability, right size housing, which essentially means that they moved for the sake of the right number of bedrooms and having enough of them. And then they were selective in moving to suburbs that had enough lifestyle amenities. What they were trying to do is sort of recreate some of the lifestyle benefits that they had in urban areas in the suburban areas. And so some additional points about this were that metro areas with larger units and more affordable prices lost less millennials to the suburbs. The suburbs had to become more amenity filled, and those that did won out the transfer of millennials to their specific suburban area. And I would say a key takeaway was that the movement to the suburbs was not likely based on a lifestyle choice or preference. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And let's see. What we can say is this last point is that cities and suburbs need to be more like one another, indicates that there's a third alternative of community type that cities and suburbs are converging towards, walkable communities, and which enable all of the things that they're looking for, that they can only find some of them in the cities and some of them in the suburbs. But the walkable communities deliver the opportunity for them to get them all. Now, one of the studies said that it's among the misconceptions were that millennials want to live in urban locations closer to employment, commercial and social centers, and prefer the flexibility of renting, and are unwilling to take the financial risks of homeownership in the wake of the collapse. That changed in the next decade. So from 2010 to 2020, they were willing to take that risk. But notice that it uses the word live here in this first quote. And then in another article, it states, the evidence suggests that home ownership decisions by younger households have much more to do with affordability than location and lifestyle preferences. The Harvard study found that homeownership rates for millennials were 5% higher in metro areas with median incomes where home prices were 20% below the national median. In other words, if they could afford to stay in the cities, they would stay there. But the reason why they moved out of the cities was because they had to make a choice between the preference of where they wanted to live for their lifestyle and where they had the opportunity to own property and could afford to do so. So if you think about the average millennial and they're making their lifestyle choices and their decisions, they moved to where was fun and cool and hip for a long time, and they wouldn't have minded staying. But what they found was that for the most part, they couldn't afford to buy property. And as they got more serious and as we realized, okay, in America, one of the ways we build wealth is through property ownership, and I can't afford to do that here. Then they realized, they started to grow up and a light bulb clicked. And what I think happened is they realized I've got to move to the suburbs in order to be able to build property. And was first for affordability's sake. And then that covers us up to about 2020. What the challenge then is that starting out 2020, we start to get a lack of affordability for basically anywhere. That starts to diminish, right? But up until then, it was still affordable in the suburbs for them. So they were compelled to buy in the suburbs in order to be able to own property, to build equity, and have a desired number of bedrooms. Let's see. And they did so for three reasons. The first was to attain ownership, establish and build equity in the suburbs. They wanted to right size their home with the right number of bedrooms, and they moved, but they were selective in moving specifically again to suburbs that were amenitized, that had lifestyle centers built in, and recreating the advantages that they had in the city to the best that they could. So you've heard the term missing middle housing before. Yeah, I figured it's a pretty common term. We're going to talk about something similar to that that not a lot of people are really talking about, but is behind the curtain of missing middle housing. So we have these two options we've been talking about: cities on the right, in city centers, and then detached single family homes on the left. But we have all these options in between, right? And this is literally, oh, sorry, where's my, there we go. All of these different types of units are the missing middle, or they're a good portion of them. We have side-by-side duplexes or stacked fourplexes, courtyard buildings right here, and cottage courts, and then, oh, sorry, this is a courtyard building, and then townhouse, multiplex. So these are all buildings that, again, they're middle. They're what you can call house scale. They fit in a neighborhood, and then you've got triplex that's stacked, and then a live work where you've got a commercial or retail unit on the bottom floor, and then apartments above. And so one of the statements relating to this is that if this is from Robert Grow at Envision Utah, if you create an artificial shortage of housing, you drive costs up. And that's true whether you don't have enough housing or if you just limit to one kind of housing. Now, the problem with that is that when you look at this missing middle housing, everyone's focused on the missing middle housing, but there's two other things that we're really missing that are creating the lack of missing middle housing that's making it be missing in the first place. The first of those things is actually our zoning codes. Our zoning codes are by nature a single use zones primarily, overwhelmingly, and that is not an organic thing that happened. That was actually a federal government creation due to financing requirements. You can read the history of that in a book called Escaping the Housing Trap by Chuck Marone. And so we tend to think of this American dream structured as organically evolving from local cities, but it's actually a federal government requirement that was based to be able to get FHA loan guarantees issued for these. They had to have detached single family. And so it's not an organic preference that Americans actually had. Up until about the 30s and early 40s, we had a very strong preference for these mixed-use walkable communities. And so form-based code or walkable community codes are the tool to re-implement that so we can have walkable community codes where you by right mix of uses without a zone change where you have to go to the council for every time you want to change. But please select the buildings that work well together in the same neighborhood and make it part of your zoning code. So again, we don't have a free market for housing. This is from our Patch County Housing Crisis Task Force report. And it's not just the missing middle housing. It's because we're missing what I call missing middle communities, which is our third alternative communities between the detached single family home dominated suburbs and the city center urban cores, both of which are at two extremes of the spectrum. And those missing middle communities are walkable communities. So what we really need are these missing middle communities, and if we can implement the form-based code and walkable community codes that make this possible, we can unblock the dam that's actually preventing this buildup, this flood, so to speak, of missing middle housing that's behind that dam. And that dam is our zoning code. And we're going to talk for most of the time about the other dam that's blocking that up. This is an overview of drivable suburban development, which is, again, primarily single use. Everything is isolated and in pods. You have to drive everywhere to get there. It is beautiful in a lot of ways and convenient for, it has been for a number of years, but there are a lot of downsides that are being noticed. And so walkable development is an alternative that provides these mix of uses, mix of housing types by right without a rezone. So it's not a political liability every time you want to build a duplex or a cottage courtyard or something next to a single family home. And they look like this in plan view. They're based on something called the transect, which we will not go into detail here, but it provides a structure to the community. And what they build in this by right flexibility for multiple housing types, because you pass the ability to develop those homes as part of the entire zone, or those dwelling types as part of a zone at one shot, and you've pre-selected to say these are the building types that we all think as a council work together for this area. None of them is too big or too small or too this or too that. And so I will tell you that as I've studied these issues, one of the biggest silent features that no one's talking about with regards to affordable housing is a lack of availability and knowledge on walkable community codes or form-based codes in our state. I'm fortunate to have a copy of one. This is what that's can be used as a template code. It's was prepared by a world-renowned planning firm, Duane Platter Zyberg. This is what they tend to look like. You'll see on this block, you have detached garages here. These could act as detached ADUs potentially. You've got townhomes over here, and you've got some medium-sized homes right here. Again, some more townhomes, and then you've got maybe some mansion-style homes. So, but if you'll notice, these are all on the same block. They are alley-fed to prioritize the streetscape, so it's pleasant for the pedestrian. And they can be customized to our region. The one that we have is actually based on the Plat of Zion, which is a planning precedent for our region. That's sort of the basis when the Latter-day Saint immigrants came here. They used a planning tool called the Plat of Zion, and this template code that I have that can be adapted was based on the Plat of Zion as well, prepared by Duane Platter Zyberg. These are some of the block designs. You can do block designs that are everything from rural to suburban to an urban center, and then or neighborhood center to an urban core, all on the 660 by 660 block. One of the other thing that we're really not talking about is that in the state as much as we should be is this issue of ownership, and it's about ownership. And so corporations, when you don't have rent, they have more control. They're driving up the cost of rent. They've shown that when corporations charge rent versus a neighbor or mom and pop type rent situation, they drive up the rent more. And as a result of that, that causes a lot of problems. It's so bad that in Atlanta, it's 25% of the market. In Jacksonville, it's about 21% of the market. And one of the things that you have a problem with is when you lose occupant ownership and have an offsite owner landlord, the owner has a lack of social skin in the game. They don't have an incentive to to play well with the neighbors and develop relationships. They also are trying to extract the maximum profits with a minimum investment. And the renter loses a financial skin in the game and incentive to invest in their property, be nice to the neighbors themselves. There, and there's it kind of circles back into lack of in interest in getting invested in the community socially because they don't have anything financially. They're looking just to find another place where they can build equity, right? So there's neither social equity or financial equity for the occupant, and that causes what you in economics you'd call an externality. In law, you'd call a detrimental effect or a negative impact. And so what we have in ownership is the same thing with regards to ownership as we have in the missing middle housing types. We actually have a missing middle ownership types. So again, this is statistically true. We'll talk about how later. You can either rent an apartment or you can own a single family home. And with that, I have a problem with that. Which is, again, when we looked at the missing middle housing types, we've got all these ones available. But again, we have the same thing with our missing middle ownership types. We're missing ownership opportunities. And this presentation shows how to reclaim those. They're actually not missing in the sense that they're not there. They're just dramatically overlooked. So when I show you this image, you can assume that it applies to basically any of these other dwelling types. These are all the number of the missing middle housing types. So I'm going to use this image a lot in the next few moments, and we will know that it doesn't represent just that building. It represents all of these types that you can do ownership with. And these are some more examples of how you can own properties like these. So if you look at this orange, this is ownership. It's the total supply of ownership opportunities, regardless of the building type, right? We have apartments down here, single family homes up here, and that represents the quadrants, right? And then along this axis, we have occupant rentership and occupant ownership, right? So what we are doing with the problem, what we have is that ownership is primarily a single family home phenomenon, and rentership is a multifamily owners phenomenon, right? And that's actually creating a lack of ownership opportunities, particularly in this quadrant, right? If we want to increase the opportunity for ownership opportunities, we need to add ownership to these different building types that we have and which we're not doing. And so as a result of that, prices on single family homes have skyrocketed so high that we're now having so many of them moved into rentership because like we talked about in Atlanta and Jacksonville, where 21 and 25% of the market are in actual rental, and they're owned by corporate landlords who property manage them, and the people rent and don't build equity. So if we want to reclaim actually the American dream, not just for ownership, but even for single family home ownership, we need to add overlooked ownership opportunities to this quadrant. But currently we're locking them because they're overlooked. If we can move this into the blue, the ownership, we can actually bring back single family home ownership as well, because what we're doing is people are now not having to make a choice between where they want to live, and we're providing additional market competition with regards to ownership for single family homes. Because someone says, if I could buy a detached single family home, but I wanted to buy an apartment, but because I can only rent an apartment, I bought a single family home because I wanted to build equity. That was my only way, right? If we stop making them have to make that false choice, and then it provides additional market pressure on prices. So here's the data that backs us up. In Utah, we have about 34% of units are rented and 66% are owned in the total market. And then with single family home, about 90% are rental, are owned. But what you see is that the higher the number, these are the units per building, 2 to 4, 5 to 19, 20 plus, and these are basically townhomes, and then these are single family. The higher number of units in the building, the more likely it is to be rented, right? So 31% for townhomes are rented, 79% for 2 to 4 unit buildings, 89%, and 20% for, 97% are rented for 20. So if we look at these as current rentals, what we're really looking at is overlooked ownership opportunities, right? By just making the assumption, well, you rent an apartment and you own a single family home, we're leaving a massive amount of ownership opportunity on the table. And my point is that we need to correct that in order to shift the American dream and restore the American dream, because we've created that false marriage between ownership and single family homes. Again, all these are the most recent data, these columns, but they again are all overlooked ownership opportunities. So what I have another half of this presentation that's not part of this that really sets the foundation for it. It's about walkable communities, and what it really the key point of it is that we're leaving a ton of ownership opportunities on the table just by not having delightful density. By not having those walkable communities, you can create smaller units that actually work together well, create a sum is greater than the whole of its parts. And you need that walkable community foundation for the ownership opportunities to really take off. So I'm going to talk about what these ownership opportunities are. They're important individually, but hopefully we'll get to showing you how they can operate as a complete system, an alternative property rights system that is completely usable here in the United States. So, and create a third alternative to mainstream occupant ownership for walkable communities and multifamily buildings. So this is the complete system. You have ownership opportunity multipliers, which are, and then these are the ownership opportunities. The main ones right here. The foundation is a walkable community, and then you've got the individual building types that are mixing middle housing that populate that walkable community type. The blue rectangles represent that they're owned in some way or another instead of rented. And these are the specific ways how. So the first is shared equity occupant ownership. This article was, I can't remember which paper it was, but it's back east. It says, a woman said, I bought a house with another single mom to share costs and maintenance. Now we have a kid paradise with built-in babysitting, car sharing, and a craft studio. And the catchphrase for this is looking out for our own best interest and another's together. They did have parts of the building that I think they had some locked doors that were private space, but they had a shared craft studio, car sharing, etc. Lowered their cost of living from and they operate as a single housekeeping unit, which is important for the planners in the room. And then the way they did this was they used tenant in common ownership on title. In 2021, there was a law passed that said internal ADUs are permitted in, I think, 75% of the land area of cities. And then in 2024, the legislature also passed a law that said you can't discriminate against fractional ownership or multiple owners on a single family home. I would argue that the combined effect of those laws is that you should be able to argue that everything that can be an ADU in the state can also be a duplex, where the ADU occupant actually can become an owner if they team up with the primary owner and decide to get equity and change the deed on the title so that it's shared equity and fractional ownership. And those are two laws that are already on the books. So planners will want to look at their community definition of a housekeeping unit. And then there's another way to do this that's called a trust note deed and a deed of reconveyance, also known as a seller carry. And then The next way is community land trusts. What you do here is you separate the ground lease, the ownership from a mortgage, and to respond to Steve's point about how equity is established and the rate at which is established. With the equity, what you do is these historically have been used for lower income, and so the reason why they set a formula that when you buy the property as the homeowner, you agree upfront to limit your sales price in the future. The purpose of that in the past has been because these are for very low income families. And so the goal is the public interest is met by keeping that future sales price low so that the affordability is preserved for the next person. And so you don't lose the public investment in the land over the long term. So now community land trusts are moving more into a mainstream role because the ownership is so hard in the first place for moderate income or higher income people. And so I do think that deserves rethinking, but the original purpose of establishing a formula was based on making sure affordability was preserved for the next person that bought the home. What you do is you get a 99-year ground lease, you get a loan from the bank for the home, you pay, say, $25 to $50 every month to that ground lease. You have essentially sort of a third parent, is kind of how it's said, for this. A nonprofit owns the ground. What they do is if they notice a payment missing to their ground lease, they can kind of come knock on your door and they can say, hey, we noticed payment was missing. Is there a problem happening? How can we help? But going in that they're going to be a partner with you and they can act as a partner. They can help you find your resources, maybe help you find your new job, things like that. There's a public investment made in the ground, and the advantage of this is that the ground is what legally makes it easiest to secure the specific conditions of the public interest over time because it's fixed to real property. The advantage for the homeowner is that they get homeownership that they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford. The advantage for the nonprofit is that they get to perpetuate affordability, where most affordability solutions require perpetual investment, and this doesn't require the same level of perpetual investment. And then the advantage for the banks is that during the Great Recession, there was a 7 to 8% failure rate on mortgages, and these only had a 1.5% because of that knock on the door. Hey, we noticed your ground lease was missing. So these need to be adjusted and rethought for our current environment. But I believe that they'll have all the solutions I've studied in terms of preserving affordability. I think this is very dynamic and has the most potential as a mass scale solution. So the next one is building cooperatives. What building cooperatives do is they make owners, they're not the same as condos. What they are is you buy a share in a corporation. With each share in the corporation, you have the right to occupy one dwelling unit. And there's a board that is similar to a condo. And so when you occupy that unit, it's because of that share in the corporation. And there are three types. There's limited equity cooperatives, full equity cooperatives, and actually zero equity cooperatives. The most common these days is limited equity cooperatives. And let's see, the reason why you use them is they actually pair a lot better with land co-op or land trusts than condos do, because you own that share. It provides a mediating institution between the fractional ownership of condos and and the community land trust. So you have the board interacts with the community land trust as opposed to a bunch of different property owners. Makes it a lot easier to do things. And so then another way to do a building co-op is through a conversion. In Minnesota, DC, and San Francisco, they all have these. What they do is they allow you to there's the tenants have the first right of refusal when a landlord sells. So when a landlord or developer decides to sell the building, the tenants already there have the right to write a letter of intent and to the developer and say, we'd like to buy this building. And then they work with a community development department to make an offer on the building. And so that's a way of reclaiming ownership, but also making ownership available to people that are in a multifamily building. And so, but this is just with existing properties that are privately held as opposed to new construction. So let's see. Another variation on this is something that they do in Europe, and by the way, and I think it's Zurich, Switzerland, 5% of their buildings are actually building cooperatives. And this is the one variation. They get together, like they'll start building the sticks of the building and the structure. Then what they'll do is essentially do a design build for a group of people that want to live in the building. They get together and they can customize it so they have some of the advantages of single family home ownership of, essentially having a custom apartment. One person wants a larger living room, or one person wants two bathrooms instead of one. They get together, but then they still have this fractional ownership of these. And by the way, before I forget, Title 16 of our state code, these are actually already legal. I've tried to find if anyone's doing them. I'm not aware of any, but they're Title 16 of our state code, and there's also Title 3, which is being talked about in the other room, which is agricultural cooperatives. And so these are already on the books, and can be paired very well with community land trusts. So a precedent for pairing community land trusts and building co-ops is in Vermont. The Champlain Housing Trust, they have at least three building co-ops that are also the land underneath it is owned in a building co-op. And so, a land trust. And what that does is it gives you, if you, depending on the land trust situation, you have the ability to not just now reduce costs by each tenant owning or owner owning a part of the building, but also potentially having the land costs taken out of it because of the land ownership. So, for instance, Steve's comments about public lands, we have Sittler lands, UDOT lands, all of these lands that community land trusts are probably an ideal fit for them. I know they've been being explored in Washington County with elites there, but when you say, okay, well, we're going to get the affordability gains that can come from using public lands for a community land trust, but then you say, but we're also going to do multifamily structures in that land trust. And now we're lowering the barrier very significantly to entry of ownership, because now I just have to own a portion of the building, my portion of the building, the unit, and I'm taking potentially some of the land costs out of it. But then the public interest is secured for generations because the reinvestment doesn't need to be made on the land every time. So these are three of those buildings. Condos are interesting. They tend to work in two extremes, again, on the small and the big. These are actually nibbly. This is about the biggest that they tend to work in the state. The reason is because of tax incentives that encourage landowner or property owners and developers to write them off on their income books and hold on to them. They can make more money by depreciating them over 7 years, and then it's called the 1031 exchange, and then they move it, and then they'll sell it and move another building into a 1031 exchange, and it provides an incentive against multifamily ownership. But they tend to, and the investment that is required to get paid back, you lose in the time it takes to get to constructing and selling a unit. The bigger they are, the longer that lag is, because you have to have 50% of the units constructed and sold before you can start recouping your investment. So they tend to work here in Utah on the smaller level, and then they tend to work in the larger, like Miami and things like that, on the larger level. Utah was the first state to do these. They are, however, our laws a bit outdated, and we're trying to update it because there's financing and insurance issues on condos the way our current law is written, and those are trying to be resolved by the legislature. So again, this is an agricultural cooperative. It's similar to a land or to a building co-op, but you own a share in a corporation that owns the land, and you have the right to farm that and to build a dwelling unit on that. The cost of the homes in this, at least a couple of years ago, were approximately $200,000. This is for self-reliance interested individuals, so that's a relatively unique solution. This is the Bridger View Co-op up in Montana. Sorry, it's a land trust, not a. And then I can't remember if there's some building co-ops in this. I think there are some there's a land trust, and then there's some condos. That's what it is. So, in the land trust, these homes sell at about half the rate, and that's due to that subsidy of the public land underneath them. You can't tell a difference between the buildings in here and the the ones that are subsidized and the ones that are not. This is maybe one of the most applicable for a local planner. If you want to look at Farmington's recent legislation, happened about a year ago. I actually came up with the same idea for an assignment for a job interview a couple of years ago. But what you're doing is converting an ADU that's detached in the rear yard to its own single family home. This is referred to as a subordinate SFR ownership, is how they call it. And their requirements are around it about, you have to have a minimum lot size for the second one. I would suggest that these work a lot better in walkable communities. And the reason why, this is one of the most famous streets in America, and I believe it's only 18 or 14 feet wide, right? You could recreate that street, in a lot of suburbs, right? And so you can provide an ownership opportunity to people in other people's backyards, particularly if you think about a lot of people are having a hard time affording the building in the front yard right now. So you can create an income opportunity for them to sell off a portion of their property that then you can create an alley in their backyard, right, of other home ownership. So you've created two affordability opportunities per lot along a whole street, right? But again, this is Beacon Hill. It's the most photographed street in America, and it's these units that could easily fit in something similar to that. So these are other ownership opportunities that involve mix of uses in one structure. This is in Ogden. This is also in Ogden. Those are slightly detached. This is here in Logan, and then this is a live work actually in Ogden as well. Occupant investor splits is what I refer to these. These are kind of similar to land trust in one sense, but one of the parties that holds equity in the property has it's a financial investment for them. And so the Rocky Mountain Homes Fund is the example that I used here. You get a 50-50 equity split at the time of sale. The occupant owner keeps one half of the appreciation equity. And so they don't lose their incentive to build wealth as well, but it lowers the barrier to entry for them to be able to own a property where they otherwise wouldn't be able to. Another one that I didn't cover is rent to own. There's a program in townhomes in southern Utah. And then again, federal and Sittler lands and other public lands in the state. I know we have this goal of 35,000 starter homes. I would say that there are some significant social concerns with just doing the starter homes. But if we can embed those in 35,000, in say 7 to 15 walkable communities, then we can create a more cohesive, beneficial social structure. And the way that we do that is by empowering form-based code and developing that knowledge base, providing a regional templates for form-based code, and then adapting them to the tastes and preferences of the local populace. And so I have a copy of this form-based code. It's the Duwani Platter-Zybert code again, and it's actually a really amazing code. These are a number of the block structures that you can create with it. The point of the form-based code is that you're not separating character from an increase in density. With every increase in density, you want an increase in character. And that's what helps prevent the NIMBYism. Another main point of ownership opportunities in general is increasing. A lot of times you hear the phrase that's regrettable, those people. Well, we tend to think of those people being associated with apartments. I don't think that the issue is the building structure that multiple families live in the same building. I think the issue is that they don't own their property because they don't have the same incentives as people in single family homes. This presentation is all about finding ways to help them own property in multifamily so we can open up additional choice and competition. So this is the ownership opportunity multipliers. This is where we kind of pour Miracle Grow on ownership opportunities. What you can do is you can create master development agreements that would be conditional of an increase in density on three characteristics: walkable community design, missing middle housing types, and architectural character requirements. And then a fourth, which is community land trust creation and participation, which may include building cooperatives as part of that. So what you're doing is you are translating all the benefits and advantages of a single family environment now to a multifamily environment by making sure that it's attractive and pleasing and desirable from an architectural point of view. The increase in density is what the developer gets, but what gets the architectural character. The missing middle housing types allows variety, so to meet a variety of families' needs. And then the community land trust creation with potentially building cooperatives for multifamily ownership also allows you to get the long-term residents to have the same incentives as single-family homes, the same interests as them. So, and another thing about that is you could potentially use master development agreements to take the cost out of the land of establishing CLTs. So, in other words, if you increase the value of the land for the developer by saying what you're going to do with that increase, we're going to give you additional density, which increases the value to you. But the condition is that you participate in or create community land trusts so that the people there now own the property that they live in, on a long-term basis. And not only that, but in an affordable way. So let's see. So the combination of walkable community codes, ownership opportunities, which include shared equity ownership, building cooperatives, CLTs, secondary subdivisions. This is one of the easiest that any city could probably do at this point. And then master plan community developments that incorporate all of these as requirements in them as in exchange for an increase in density. Another thing that I didn't get a chance to finish up when I was at Cache County was that I think qualifies as an ownership opportunity is we started to write a draft code of an increase in density conditional upon average unit size. So if your average unit size stays within, say, 8 to 1,200 square feet, you get, say, a 20 or 25% increase in the number of units, which provides a financial incentive for a developer to provide smaller units that are then more affordable, right? Because if they're smaller on the floor size, then they get more units, right? And so you're helping out the developer, do what they need to do to get the bills to balance by doing what's right for people being able to have affordable opportunities. So what this is a diagram of a system-wide series of ownership opportunities that all are applied to different environments and different building structures, right? On the left, you have ADU ownership that turns into subordinate SFR, shared equity agreement, tenancy in common, building cooperatives, condominium ownership, development agreement, system, and then community land trust can be applied to any of these in development agreements as well. And they can apply to, in their respective sphere to each of these different units. What I haven't had it, so again, we start with the foundation of walkable communities, increase the density in general, but we trade for ownership, which is the blue rectangles, a requirement of missing middle housing that are all owned, these different varieties are all owned, and you do that through these structures: shared equity ownership, community land trust, building cooperatives, condo ownership, occupant investor splits, MDAs, and more. And then you use MDAs and what I call CLT supported building cooperatives to multiply those opportunities. And you can use them on federal lands, with permission. I think Trump said that would be a good idea, something to that effect a few months ago. And then SITLA and other public lands. So the point is this is not just one idea, it's a system of ideas that are all coordinated together to make a complete alternative property rights system that's geared entirely around affordability. So I think that covers everything that I can go over. I do have, these are action steps that we can start taking today. We enable form-based code. We need a massive increase in understanding of walkable community codes, form-based codes in the state. It's one of the biggest things that no one's talking about that is killing our housing market in terms of affordability. It's just absolutely killing it. And I don't mean to be rude, but I can't emphasize that enough. So develop a model for deed restrictions and nonprofit organizations, model documents for community land trusts, model documents for deed restrictions, and then look at SITLA and other public lands as prime opportunity to develop walkable communities and community land trusts. So Steve, to your point, the best use of public lands, that being a key issue that you've talked about a couple of times, the community land trusts what's so great about them is that they're perpetual affordability, right? If you can pair those with form-based codes, then you can maximize the number of not just the affordability of each individual unit, but the maximum number because you increase the density and you make these trades and compensations to the public and the developers to make both of them happy. So county and city level develop a model zoning ordinance for subsidiary subdivision. You can look at Farmington. I know JDC Ranch has a great provision for 2-week priority for certain income level and role in what is it called, like military and school teachers, et cetera, public servants, and then develop a model for small size condos and model organization documents. A lot of these, and then we can also create model documents for tenancy in common for people. And then adjust your zoning ordinance to make sure that these are supported, these different ownership opportunities. And then these are some more, but I'm going to kind of leave it there. These are assignments for me to take care of. I've got one more component of this that I got to add, which is my thesis from school that actually I realized ties Maslow's hierarchy of needs to these different ownership opportunities. So I'll leave it at that and open it to questions. So.
But doing a form-based code as a state model code, if that's something you've done.
The first answer to the first part of your question is absolutely yes. We are. When the state passed the law that restricted design standards, that actually, in the long term, I think is going to decrease affordability because if you use those tools right, paired with the other aspects of form-based code, we can drastically increase affordability. What they do is they we're trying to please the NIMBYs, the developers, and the potential homeowners all at the same time, right? And so if we can give those controls back to the right organization in the right way, paired with an increase in density, then we can please both the NIMBYs and the developers and the future homeowners. Yes, and so I can provide you a copy of the Duwani Platter Cyber code, actually, if you'd like a copy of it. What this code is, it's not just a code, it's a template for creating new codes that can be customized to each region, all based on the Plat of Zion in our state. So it's actually already customized to our state. So
using one single item which you showed, but awesome.
yeah.
Icon onto that slideshow.
Yeah. So they go from rural and agrarian to urban. And what that shows you is that these can all be adapted to our state in particular. They're not, these are not like something that doesn't fit our precedent region. And they're actually, again, this code was developed by one of the premier planning firms in the world, Duwani Platter Zyberg. I got a copy of it from an internship that I worked at 10 or so years ago. But you've got agrarian orchards over here and backyard gardens. You've got more rural environments here and suburban right here. And then you've got more urban over here. And Andres Duwani said that the Plat of Zion, well, this is what he said about the Plat of Zion. He says, you have a Ferrari in the garage and you haven't even taken it out for a spin, right? You're using it like a dump truck. We look at the Plat of Zion and we sort of think it's sort of basic and it's simple and it's a grid. But it was actually designed to be one of the most flexible planning precedents in the history of the world. And it's absolutely amazing what you can do with it because it's large enough to further subdivide to create more urban environments if needed, but big enough to grow substantial crops in the middle, in the rural end of it. So it creates it very flexible.
In Smithfield, quite a bit put together a survey a month or so ago. 440 responses. How important is small town feel to you? 95% is a super important. Yeah. So I think I've got language around general plan that is which parts of town are you talking about? Unless define which part of town you're talking about. And let's define what is about that part of town to love. And let's see if we can find a way to do infill without destroying that.
Yeah.
So this is interesting to me because we got by my count 14 off the old plan.
So kind of to answer your question with a statement that Steve made to start out, he talked about everyone wants things to stay the same. What if we, instead of thinking about wanting things to stay the same, we want them to stay good and we want quality to stay the same or increase, right? And so if people talk about small town fill, what about just a high quality fill? Well, you can couch remarkable amounts of density and growth in small environments and do it successfully if you do things like add street trees, bring the building to the front, require architectural standards, and then you can, those small lots they become an amenity, not a detriment. The problem is we've divorced design and character from density, and that's why we get the pushback that we do. So you can grow and still feel like a small town while adding density and maintain that high quality feel. So
it's a leadership task to build this.
yes, absolutely.
People want
Yeah. Yes. Great question.
Financial community work, because that seems to be something why any of our
So
stuff created.
yeah, that's a great question. I don't have that piece of the puzzle solved entirely yet. I mentioned this the last presentation I gave. John Anderson, I did talk to him when I went to the Congress for the New Urbanism this year. I need to follow up on that conversation. I think this is a state level issue that we should be putting significant resources into. If we want to preserve home ownership, we need to start finding ways to issue loans and work with lenders and encourage them to provide mortgages and loans to people who are not necessarily going to be living in a detached single family home but don't want to lose ownership. They do it with community land trusts and they do it on the East Coast with building cooperatives. So we just need to bring that expertise or gain that expertise here. But that's probably a state level endeavor to do that because of the, just so that we can spread it across the whole state and just do it once. But the other thing is, one of the that I didn't mention is actually deed restrictions as an ownership opportunity, but the way to do them right is probably in Moab. Is the way they do them where it's structured as equity. So the 501c3 has some equity in there and the enforcement arm on the affordability over the long term. So can I go to someone else real quick? Sorry, we're short on time, but I'll talk to you after if that's okay. Mayor Cox.
Before we go back to state as a great idea for it to be legislated down. Not every person walked into Spanish Fork plays well in Moab or St. George or Cache Valley. So it could work on the form-based code, but having variations or drop downs that would allow that type of growth and development, not mandating one policy here.
Yeah.
Because that typically works so well.
Yes. Top down is always fun for everyone, right?
Similar to modern income housing plans, where you get a big free out of this, long list of 13 options and some of the good shit aren't playing well.
So this form-based code that's based on the Plat of Zion that fits our region is, again, it's a template code in which you take it to the community and you choose your own adventure to a degree, right? So there's a heavy amount of local customization to say we want this sort of block structure and this sort of density in this area, right? And so it's like if you imagine a sliding scale for like music, right? Like it has 13 to 15, keys or notes that you can hit along that space, that continuum, and the community calibrates it or adjusts it to what fits for them. So the code is not one set of policies, it's a range of policies that can be chosen from. It's a menu to be selected from. So other questions. I'll say this, if there's other questions, raise your hand. What I've tried to do is address a whole system that's based on affordability and